Man is the measure.
Yes, or at least conscious beings are the measure.
Yeah, so
it's interesting here. There's a kind of sop thrown to the animal rightists. Conscious life is the measure. And I wondered, as I read this, I thought, well, gee, I wonder why he discriminates against non-conscious forms of life. The poor non-sentient creatures get kind of left out here. I mean, after all, there is a science of what contributes to the flourishing of corn, or there's a science of what contributes to the flourishing of slime molds or conches or slugs. They kind of get left out here. There's a science of what contributes to their flourishing, but that isn't defined to be part of the good. And I wondered, well, on what basis? Again, it seems there's a sort of speciesism going on here where one is simply adopting an unjustified bias toward one's own species.
So he's gone beyond man is the measure to sentient beings.
Sentient life is the measure.
I'm curious, Bill, if we did an experiment in society for 20 years wherein we eliminated everyone over the age of 65, executed them, put them to sleep, and we saw a huge spike in quality of life as far as economics, less traffic, less healthcare cost, less burden on society and all this, and you saw this flourishing, this human flourishing all of a sudden. I think that Sam Harris would point to that and say, yeah, but these people over the age of 65 are humans and they're conscious and we ought not do that.
I'm sure he would say that.
But if you just
the question is, doesn't his view impel one toward that conclusion? And I think, Kevin, here we begin to see the really sinister side of this view of the moral good. He says in the book that a piecemeal account is now emerging of how human beings flourish. And it immediately occurred to me, wouldn't this lead to eugenics?
Yes.
Where, in order to promote the flourishing of human beings, you would practice infanticide or abortion on any children that are born with physical deformities that are hereditary, which would have eliminated someone like me, for example, who has a genetic neuromuscular disease, as well as people with other sorts of handicaps. The vision of the eugenicist was to craft a kind of super race that would be free of all genetic defects and inherited diseases and would lead to this great flourishing of human beings at the relatively small cost of just eliminating these defective people. And so...
What a nightmare.
Oh, I think this is a very dark side to Sam Harris's ethic of human flourishing here.
This is what I think. I mean, if you're going to go by strictly scientific measurements, it's going to lead to all kinds of things like that. Eugenics and eliminating undesirables, quote unquote, and things like that.
Well, yeah, obese people, for example,
yeah.
And other sorts of undesirables would not contribute overall to human flourishing because it would promote more disease, more economic hardship on the rest of us, and so forth, as we have to support these people.
Stephen Hawking would be one of the first guys to go.
Oh, my goodness, yes. And there goes Hawking.
But he's right in line, it seems, with Peter Singer on a lot of things like this. He's very controversial. And I don't think he's that radical, or he's trying not to be. But what it seems to me, Bill, is that science may measure the results of certain actions. Suppose everybody in the community decided to be more loving. Mm-hmm. And we were actually able to see some spikes and peaks on a scientific graph. If we were to graph that somehow, that would only be a reflection of the moral activity that took place. So it can maybe science can measure certain things, but that doesn't determine.
Oh, I think we would. I see no objection whatsoever to developing a science of human flourishing as he wants to do. He seems to regard this as controversial, which is interesting. He admits we don't really have it yet. It's only piecemeal, but he's hoping that we can develop a science of what really contributes to human well-being. And that's great. I think that's fine, but I just don't see any moral dimension to that on atheism as to why that would be something that would be good. And quite the contrary, as your most recent remarks here have suggested, this is open to abuse in the most frightening of ways in that it could lead to kind of eugenics and end-of-life issues and so forth, that where you would justify moral atrocities in the name of human flourishing.
Again, it's a nightmare. Amazon asks Sam Harris, what do you think the role of religion is in determining human morality? His answer, I think it is generally an unhelpful one. Religious ideas about good and evil tend to focus on how to achieve well-being in the next life, and this makes them terrible guides to securing it in this one. Of course, there are a few gems to be found in every religious tradition, but insofar as these precepts are wise and useful, they are not, in principle, religious. You do not need to believe that the Bible was dictated by the Creator of the universe, or that Jesus Christ was His Son, to see the wisdom and utility of following the golden rule.
Yeah, that's a red herring.
Yeah.
Of course not. We don't think that you need to believe in God or Jesus in order to discern your moral duties or to realize that certain moral values are objective, like love and self-sacrifice for another and tolerance and so forth. And of course, that's not the argument. The argument that we're claiming is that in order to ground moral values and duties objectively, you need to have a transcendent source. They need to be grounded in God.
Well, once again, this has been an attempt to rescue morality from the religious realm and put it firmly in the secular realm. And it seems at the same time missing some issues along the way.
I think what it is it's one more example of how atheists blink when they stare into the face of atheism and see its consequences. So few modern atheists have the courage that Nietzsche had to look atheism in the face and understand the consequences of the death of God, and they cannot live with the sort of moral nihilism that results. And so you get these salvage operations which make gratuitous assumptions about the nature of the good and human flourishing, and therefore try to provide a kind of secular substitute for a religious foundation for morality.
Here's what an Amazon reviewer said, who's an atheist. He said, of course, a belief that makes people happy is no more likely to be true than one that makes people miserable. But if you're writing a book about the importance of well-being, the book is a conversation starter, to be sure. But by the time I got to the end, I was left with no real answers and with a feeling that Harris, like everyone else, is just frantically dog-paddling to escape the quagmire of moral emptiness that's forever sucking at our postmodern minds.
Wow.
While tipping an intellectual bow in its direction. Here's the point where a reluctant nihilist fails to find moral direction in science and has another beer.